I'm so glad everybody came back for session 2. There's, I think, maybe a couple of new faces in here. I'm Luciana Spraker. I'm the Archives and History, I was going to say professor. I'm the Archives and History Officer for the City of Savannah. And this is session 2 of our 2026 Hungry for History Student Showcase, which is a great opportunity to let some of our local students shine and share their history research with us. And so for our session 2, we have 3 more great speakers with us. And we are going to be hearing from Hayden Reeves with Georgia Southern University. He's studying history, and he is going to be speaking on Safe Spaces in Savannah, the activism and geography of lesbian and gay positive businesses in Savannah, 1985 to 2000. He's going to be followed by Marcus Labat, who's studying at Savannah Technical College in historic preservation. He's going to do Preservation Off the Beaten Path, the Savannah Powder magazine. And then rounding out the program will be Meghan Mooney from Georgia Southern University studying anthropology. Meghan's going to be Serving the Living by Protecting the Ancestors, a community-centered archaeological study of Gould Cemetery, Harris Neck, McIntosh County, Georgia. A couple of reminders, if you don't have your phones muted, if you could do that. Each of the speakers is going to present, and we're going to save all of our Q&A for the end together. And I think you all know to fill out your evaluations at the end and leave them behind for me. So if I can get Hayden to come up first.
Hello, everybody. Thank you guys so much for coming today. As it was mentioned, I will be presenting my paper, Safe Spaces in Savannah. It may come as a surprise to some visiting Savannah for the first time that a handful of businesses display pride flags and LGBTQ+ friendly stickers on their exteriors. As someone who only recently moved to Southeast Georgia, I was a part of that collective. I wrongfully associated any city outside of the Atlanta metro area with deeply rooted homophobia, conservatism, and Christian fundamentalism. While this association may have held some weight before the millennium, the culture has shifted due to the tireless work of many LGBTQ+ activists over decades to craft an environment of acceptance in a city that once turned a blind eye to violence and prejudice against the community. Savannah prides itself on being a city that lives in the past, with its southern charm being a draw for tourists and transplants to the area. However, the city has also grown more tolerant of open expressions of queer identity, which sets it apart from the surrounding cities. This tension between the carefully crafted image of southern Savannah and the push for queer visibility in the city serves as a starting point for answering the question of how queer Savannians were able to force public recognition and carve out their own safe spaces in the city. As I contemplated this dichotomy further, I coincidentally stumbled upon the Mapping the Gay Guides public history project. The project focuses on the Bob Dameron Address Book, a vital resource for gay men who traveled or moved to new cities across the United States. Bob Dameron, a native of San Francisco, created a comprehensive list of gay-friendly establishments throughout the US starting in 1964 and updated the guide for nearly 60 years. Similarly, Network News, a publication of the LGBTQ+ organization First City Network, shared lists of lesbian and gay positive businesses with their monthly issues. Both of these resources were forms of activism and alternative forms of visibility. For the newspapers and directories of Savannah refrained heavily from including positive interpretations of homosexuality in their publications. Using both the Bob Dameron Address Book and First City Network's Network News, this paper will serve as an overview of how queer Savannians from 1985 to 2000 directly challenged societal norms of homophobia and prejudice by creating their own forms of advertising for lesbian and gay positive businesses. The Mapping the Gay Guides project has compiled nearly 180,000 locations across 4.5 decades of entries in the Bob Dameron address book. The online database features lists of locations from the address books and hosts a map of the locations for ease of access. Amanda Reagan, a professor at Clemson University, and Eric Gonzaba, a professor at California State University, Fullerton, recently released a new version of the project that expanded its scope from just 1965 to 1980 to include up to 2003. This collection of locations helps reveal the places queer Savannahans found kinship through and how queer expression evolved during the final decades of the 20th century. The sites listed from 1965 to the mid-1980s are heavily dominated by cruising spots, including areas like the squares on Bull Street, the fountain at Emmett Park, and the Oglethorpe Mall. These were sites where gay men could meet and connect, but featured very few public expressions of homosexuality. This discrete culture started to shift to more publicly visible locations, including bars and clubs that displayed themselves as catering to the gay population. It was at places like Planters Tavern Bar, Who's Who, Faces, Club One, Faces 2, and Felicia's Bar that queer Savannahans, particularly gay white men, could interact without fear of public persecution. Reagan and Gonzaba make it a point to analyze why a majority of the locations are catered to the white gay male experience, and have come up with a handful of explanations. Due to the fact that Dameron was a gay white male, and that a majority of the places listed in early iterations of the address book were locations that he personally visited, it is reasonable to assume that the locations he promoted would be catered to that set of identities. Also, the experiences of lesbians and gay African Americans were vastly different due to the sexism and racism that littered the undertones of their experiences, and the culture of othering that occurred within the queer community. This, however, was partially rectified with the creation of the Dameron Women's Traveler in 1990. This address book, spearheaded by Gina Gatta, listed locations catered to lesbians throughout the United States, but these locations have yet to be digitized. The creation of a separate channel for lesbians to find gay-friendly places represents the limitations of gay-centric narratives of queer expression and the expansion of efforts to push for diversity in gay-friendly spaces. As the 90s started, more locations were listed that expanded queer expression beyond nightlife businesses and into other forms of organizations. First City Network was listed with a location on Tatnall Street as an effort to promote involvement of Savannahans who may have purchased the address book but avoided public participation with FCN. Other institutions, including Any Length AA, Savannah AA, the 912 Barnard Victorians Bed and Breakfast, and Captain Video, represented the gay positive businesses of Savannah growing outside of the prototypical shell of nightlife culture into public displays of queer expression through general community-serving institutions. Starting in 1986, First City Network published monthly editions of its organization newsletter, Network News. This publication served as a form of community building for the organization and was a physical representation of the growth and visibility for the community. Each issue featured a section titled Gay and Lesbian Positive Businesses and Organizations, or simply Directory, that listed businesses that were in support of lesbian and gay positivity in the city. These businesses and organizations were also advertised in the newsletter, which brought in a form of revenue for the newsletters besides donations and membership fees. A handful of these businesses, including Savannah Green Goods, owned by FCN co-founder Mark Kruger, Captain Video, a movie rental store mentioned previously, and of course First City Network itself, were listed in the directories and advertised in the newsletter for the entire 14-year period analyzed. These recurring listings showed continuity in the community's effort to promote gay positive businesses and represented the formation of a distinct economic network that reinforced community solidarity. The most telling sign of growth in the lesbian and gay positive businesses in Savannah during this period came with the rise in the number of businesses and organizations listed each year. The earliest issues of Network News featured around 9 to 10 gay positive business listings, many of which had ties to founding members of FCN. By 1990, the directory took up half a page and featured around 25 businesses and organizations. There were 38 listings by 1995, and by 2000, a total of 92 listings covered a 2-page fold of the newsletter. By the mid-90s, the list of businesses shifted from alphabetical ordering to listing by subcategory due to the amount of entries, which included art stores, book and video shops, house services, legal services, nightclubs, restaurants, pet services, etc. Some well-known examples include the Who's Who Disco, Faces 2 Lounge, Riverworks Craft Gallery, Stardust Book Emporium, Club One, the Ritz Salon, and so many more. This vast array of different businesses revealed a deeply interconnected network of individuals that sought to grow their city into a more lesbian and gay positive community by supporting one another and giving advertisement space to those that would be rejected by mainstream media. An example of this can be found in 1988, when the Savannah Morning News and Savannah Evening Press rejected an FCN-sponsored advertisement due to their inclusion of the words gay and lesbian, while simultaneously allowing advertisements from Bible Baptist Church's pastor, Reverend Dr. Cecil Hodges, that publicly condemned homosexuals as perverts. By aligning themselves with the queer community, especially in a conservative city during the AIDS crisis, these businesses and organizations invited potential backlash and hatred, but simultaneously functioned as a form of activism through support. These lesbian and gay positive businesses did more than build visibility for the community, for they also grew the community through solidarity and mutual support. In 1989, Faces 2 hosted a donation drive for people impacted by Hurricane Hugo. And when Who's Who burned down that same month, the community hosted a funeral for the loss of representation and a place of belonging for the community. In 1990, Faces 2 also hosted an AIDS benefit that shared its earnings with the Phoenix Project, an organization dedicated to providing free housing and healthcare for people with AIDS. Charlotte, a member of FCN, wrote a letter to the editor of Network News in 1994, sharing that she, quote, took comfort and found empowerment in the community. FCN, Community Action Group, gay-friendly businesses, newspaper columns written by members of our community, and in my own repeated experiences of coming out to people, all of these things undercut homophobia, end quote. When the space was not given to them by society, lesbian and gay individuals of Savannah created their own safe spaces and boosted their visibility as a community by supporting the gay positive businesses in their region. Taken together, both the Bob Dameron address books and Network News directories reveal a conversation between the ways queer Savannians lived during the late 20th century. While the early Dameron listings reveal places of discrete meetups and underground existence, Network News changed this narrative by including places that were not inherently made for queer interaction and instead promoted queer expression. This twofold existence, one of privacy out of necessity and one of visibility and solidarity, merged into a united front by the turn of the millennium, as revealed by the overlapping locations featured in both listings. The accumulation of these efforts can be seen in the 2003 edition of the Savannah City Directory. When I started my research, I plan on using the city's directories to corroborate my findings and check the validity of addresses and other information listed in the Dameron and Network News listings. However, it came to my surprise that it was only in 2003 that the city started listing FCN as a social service and welfare organization. The exclusion of the main purpose of FCN to be an organization dedicated to growing Savannah into a lesbian and gay positive community represents the importance of the Dameron in network news listings as alternative forms of advertising and community outreach. Collectively, the Bob Dameron address books, with the help of the Mapping the Gay Guides project and network news, reveal an often overlooked narrative of queer activism and self-determination in the coastal empire. What began as a network of discrete underground spaces for queer people to interact evolved into a web of businesses, organizations, and institutions that openly associated themselves with the queer community and identified with the gay positive label. Through their own forms of advertising and public outreach, these gay positive businesses made space for their existence in an environment historically hostile to such associations. Understanding this growth is pertinent to understanding the development of First City Network and the broader evolution of Savannah as a safe space for queer expression, both of which are topics of investigation in my growing master's thesis project. This comprehensive account of Savannah's gay positive businesses provides an initial map of the society FCN operated in and the evolution of the queer positive culture of the hostess city of the South. Thank you.
All right, hello, how's everybody doing? My name is Marcus Labat. I'm a first semester student at Savannah Technical College studying historical preservation, and this is actually my class project for this semester, the Savannah Powder Magazine. So for those of you who don't know what a magazine is, if you're thinking it's like a magazine like Jet Magazine, it's any place where you could store munitions. When I was in the military, I was in the military for a little while, and my unit was actually called a magazine because I was an ordnance, I dealt with ordnance. So the Powder Magazine that you're looking at right here, this is a municipal building owned by the city of Savannah. It looks like a military fort, but it's out in the middle of nowhere off of McIntosh Road, right? It looks like a castle, and we're going to talk about exactly why it looks that way. There's actually a unique history to why it was built the way it was built, and there's a rich history behind it. I only have 15 minutes, so I got to keep moving. My reputation goes before me. My teacher, I believe my teacher, Luciana didn't tell me, she said, yeah, if you got Marcus coming, you better tell him to keep it brief because he likes to talk. And so the Powder Magazine was, to understand why this Powder Magazine was built the way it was built, we need to go actually to the history. There was actually a few more powder magazines before this one. Savannah's had at least 6 other powder magazines, again, places where you would store things like gunpowder or dynamite. But the other ones were all built for military uses, right? So the other powder magazines from Savannah's founding went all the way back to 1750. We had a couple of them before the War of 1812. One of them right here, Fort Provost. That's a zoom in of it right there, that little middle picture. And none of them survive now. The only one we actually have that's actually still around is the one that I showed you a picture of in the slide before. Now, if you look for any of these powder magazines in your magazine ward, you're going to find the Trustees Garden Morris Center. A lot of these magazines were in an area called the Trustees Garden. One of them actually, when I was driving here, we actually passed by Magazine Street, and I believe one of them actually was on Magazine Street. We're going to talk about that one as well. One of the more interesting stories, and this I found in the archives, I found an allusion to it in the archives, and I had to go online to get a more detailed picture of it. It talks about what happened to one of these magazines. Now, I don't have a picture of it because it was actually blown up. There was a powder magazine in 1831 near Fort Halifax. So this is the one on Fort Provost. The one on Fort Halifax, again, don't have a picture of it, but you could look at it. Probably looks similar to that one in the middle there. It was part of the fortifications for the War of 1812, and they built it in 1812. But by 1831, we have an article from a newspaper called the Daily Savannah Republican. And I like, this is one of the neat things I liked about this semester, looking at some of these old Georgia magazines. If anybody's looked at some of these older magazines on the magazine archives, they look nothing like what we have now. You'll have just a big, one big page spread, and everything is crammed onto one page. You have your classifieds, you have local news, international news, and so on this spread, October 26, 1831, in the Daily Savannah Republican, there's an article that talks about a magazine that actually blew up. I'm going to read to you a portion of it because it's really neat. But as you read it, this is just me. You have to almost read it like you're a picture of like an older lady with some pearls, drinking her sweet tea on her porch, and she got the Daily Savannah Republican. Because as you're reading it, that's what it sounds like. All right, now I'm going to try not to let I'm from Las Vegas originally, I'm not from the South. But when I read this, I was practicing with my wife the other day, and I almost started having my little southern drawl started coming out. And you can almost hear her voice as they're reading it, right? So this is in the middle, again, in the middle of this whole little newspaper, this comes out of nowhere. We have just returned from witnessing the most awful sight which it was ever fallen our lot to witness. About 12:15, the town was alarmed by an explosion and report which shook many of the largest brick buildings on and near the bay. It was soon circulated about that the magazine at the lower end of town had blown up. Such unfortunately proved to be the case. It was the building formerly owned by the heavy artillery and used as the city magazine. On proceeding to the scene of misfortune, we were struck with the sight, the bare recollection of which causes our blood to curdle. I picture her just clutching her pearls as she said that. The building was in flames, at least the lower part. The upper part was blown away and lay scattered around in various sized masses. One solid mass of brick and mortar, at least 5 feet square, was thrown over the fortification in the rear, at least 30 feet from the building. Scattered at various distances and in various places lay the disjointed limbs of some of those unfortunate beings who were engaged in and near the building at the time of the explosion. We saw one entire body lying near the building. About 20 feet from it was presented the horrible spectacle of a body torn in two in the middle. The lower extremity was in some other direction. We understood that some bodies had been removed. The left arm and the shoulder of a white man, the foot of a black, were found in the adjacent marsh. The precise number of lives lost is impossible to ascertain at this moment of excitement. And then it just stops. And then right after that, there's like a advertisement for somebody selling a horse. And so with that, you can see how the people living in Savannah at that time, this was in, again, what was then downtown Savannah. You know where the Trustees Garden is. For something like that to happen downtown Savannah, the people of Savannah were noticeably shaken to their core, and there began to be a movement. You could see it in the archives and the records for the aldermen and the city council meetings. People want to get this powder magazine moved outside of city limits. And after this explosion, it'd be another 40 years before they move it because something called Civil War happened, and they couldn't move it right then. But even after they moved it, they only moved it a few miles out of town, close to the rail, actually close to the waterworks station, the waterworks building we were talking about earlier. The Springfield plantation, the Springfield powder magazine was close to the railroad, and it was a wooden magazine that they had used. It was left over from the Confederate. It was a Confederate powder magazine. And when the railroad cars would pass by it, they would send sparks right towards this wooden powder magazine. And so the people in Savannah were like, we really need to get it away from no wooden buildings. We need to build our own powder magazine to store these explosives, something safer. So the answer to their cries was what we have right now, the current Savannah powder magazine. Right? And so this is a one-of-a-kind, purpose-built, utilitarian municipal building. Unlike the other powder magazines that were parts of military fortifications, this one was built with the express purpose of just housing the city's explosives, like black powder and dynamite. And we need to just throw this in here that at the time, this was the reason that Savannah could experience its rapid expansion after the Civil War, because before dynamite was invented, to clear any kind of land, you needed axes and people just hacking away at trees. There was no bulldozers, there was no land clearing equipment. And so once dynamite was invented, it sparked another, something that came to the Industrial Revolution. You were able now to do mining without people breaking their backs all day. You could do it faster, you could clear land, and it fueled a great explosive growth. But you needed somewhere to store that, as we just talked about, safely. And so when you building this powder magazine was an investment for the city of Savannah and in their citizens to fuel that growth. Another thing that this powder magazine had on it was actually a keeper's cottage. You can't see in this picture because it's since then been taken away. It's actually we still have it, it's stored in a different location. But the keeper's cottage actually housed somebody called the keeper of the magazine who would live there 24 hours a day. It was a city employee, and they were, ever since the magazine opened in 1898, all the way up until they stopped selling out of there in 1963, there was a keeper there all the time for safety and to make sure that nobody, of course, stole the dynamite. Up this way, sorry. Up, back, back. There we go. All right. One of the more prominent, I have to say, one of the more famous keepers was the last one, called her Lady Dynamite. A lady named Barney Clark. There's actually a lady. This is during a time when women were fighting for equal pay. They had Miss Barney Clark. She was a lady keeper of the powder magazine. We're going to get some better pictures, but that's a picture of what it looked like inside of it. This is it back in 1963 when they're getting ready to close it down. After a while, the city did not have as much of a need for dynamite and a need for black powder, of course, that diminished years before that. This is a picture of what those kegs of dynamite looked like. If you're wondering what caused that explosion I talked about in the last slide, this is I don't want to move, but that's what a keg of powder looks like. And to cooper it, coopering is when you're actually fixing those big barrels. Somebody was coopering it using an iron tool instead of a wooden one. When you're coopering these barrels, you have to use all wooden instruments because one spark, the whole thing will go up. And so one of the coopers, they said one of the coopers was using a iron adze, which was a tool used to open it instead of a wooden one. That's what caused that explosion. And so Miss Barney Clark was the last keeper, and we were actually able to interview some of her niece, a niece and a nephew of hers, and her grandson. Not too long ago, they had a little. It wasn't. What was it? It was a. What's the thing called, sis? You were there. We did a. It was an interview, but they did it for. It was a. No, it was an audio. It was an audio.
Podcast?
No, not Black History. It was a thing that they have for the city center where they do the audio histories and they record it. Oral history. There we go. Thank you. Oral history. And she related stories to us about riding those barrels down a ramp into the powder magazine. So if you can picture an 8-year-old girl riding a barrel of dynamite down into the powder magazine, and then she said that they would actually have bonfires on the other side of the powder magazine. So if you can imagine that. And so, but that kind of shows you the mindset that people, at least the people at the powder magazine, thought that it was that safe where the kids could write it down and then you could have a bonfire outside of it. And yeah, they did it. All right, so let's talk about the architects. We have two architects that they came together to design this powder magazine. You have Alfred S. Eichberg and Hyman Whitcover. Eichberg, notably, Savannah, I think SCAD owns that building now. It's Eichberg Hall. That's the City Hall in Brunswick. Whitcover did the Sacred Heart Catholic Church, our City Hall, which I thought we were going to be here today. We're here, and the Gould Street Library. What these buildings all have in common, they have a lot of high styling. And Eichberg actually designed another building. I didn't get a picture of it. It's a school in Brunswick. And on their website, they said that, and notably at the time, it was uniquely fireproof. And so you can definitely see why they want him to build the powder magazine. The other thing I want you to notice about these two architects and the way they design things, they're all very high style. You see a lot of Gothic representation. And so you may ask, why would they want to have these two architects come together to build something like this? And so the notable features in this magazine, in the powder magazine, I think that they're here for a certain reason. And we're going to talk about that for a little bit. As we said, this architectural design was the only collaboration that we know of these two notable architects, and there was a definite purpose for it. And the city of Savannah was trying to convey a message. I believe that that message was that the city of Savannah cared about the safety of its citizens, because there was this magazine was built in 1898. So that means if you were 75 years old in 1898, you were 8 years old when that explosion happened. You remembered it. And so there could have very well been people around that remember that first explosion. This was Savannah's investment in the community, saying that we're going to build something that symbolizes strength and impenetrability. Though it wasn't ever a military fort, they wanted it to look like one, because they wanted to convey that idea that this thing is going to be safe, and they put a lot of high styling in there. It's actually Gothic Revival styling to include a crenellated and corbel parapet that makes up the castle. And there's 2 rooms inside of there. I was trying to research to see if they had one room that had maybe the black powder, and one room that had the dynamite, but nobody really knows. They haven't figured that out yet. 1,700 feet on the inside. That little thing right there is actually one of the air holes, which we'll talk about in the next slide. It helps to ventilate it. One thing, when you actually go to the powder magazine, if you can go in, and we're trying to make it a more public place right now, it's locked up because it had a lot of vandalism. One of the desires for the powder magazine is that it could be turned into a park where the community could actually enjoy it. But if you get the privilege to be able to go inside it, you'll notice that the temperature drops from, if it's like 100 degrees outside, it drops down and it feels like it's 80 or 90 when you walk in. You feel like 15-degree temperature because it's so well insulated. There you go. Above each door, there's crenellated archways, and each door originally had a large iron door and a wooden screen door. One of the wooden doors was stolen. I saw that in my research by thieves, but it was later recovered and is stored safely off-site. If you go inside of it, one of the iron doors is actually still there. And then as you walk in to the interior, it's completely covered in asphalt. You have a steel arched roof, and it's really ribbed. You can see the different ribs. You can see the steel arches going all the way through. It's covered in bricks and another layer of asphalt, and the exterior walls consist of a single wide exterior brick with an air gap present between an interior double wide brick wall, which means it's two rows of brick on the inside, the little air gap, and then the exterior wall. So in between those 2 layers, there's actually a, let me go back to this. If you can see in the very, very back, you see that little hole, that little box right there? That is how the light would come in, because there was no electricity inside the powder magazine. The only light you would get would be the natural sunlight from the doors if they were open. And that's again why they didn't have to. They had the iron screen door, because if the wood door was in, it would lock all the heat in. So they would leave the wood door open, and they had the iron screen door, and they'd have these little light boxes. Well, I'm gonna zoom in on the light box. These light boxes had air vents because what the keeper of the powder magazine would have to do, they'd have to walk outside of the powder magazine and put a candle or an oil lamp outside. On the inside right there, there'd be glass so that, of course, the sparks couldn't come inside and light all the dynamite. You could actually still see little shards of glass. The glass is now not there anymore from vandalism, sadly, but you can still see little shards of glass where there used to be a piece of glass there, and they have iron covers that would cover them up. So when you're not using it, you could close it with an iron cover. These are just some of the safety things that they had to make sure that nothing would actually be able to, no sparks, no kind of flames would ever come into the powder magazine. Before this, in other powder magazines, they had other neat little things that I found in my history. One of the rules, they said that you could not walk into the other powder magazines wearing shoes, because back then men had, they would have dress shoes with nails in them. And they were afraid that if you had nails in your shoes, you'd make a spark. So to go inside the powder magazine, you actually had to have woolen stockings. And that's one of the things that they used to do. This is obviously a great improvement over the woolen stockings. Thank you. All right. And questions? See, 2 minutes is spare.
Hello, everybody. tough act to follow over here. But thank you guys for taking the time to be here. My name is Meghan Mooney, and my presentation is about history, dispossession, and material culture at the Gould Cemetery in McIntosh County. So this presentation examines the Gould Cemetery as a sacred burial ground and a living cultural landscape tied to the historic Harris Neck Gullah Geechee community. My thesis research focuses on how descendant oral history, cemetery material culture, and non-invasive archaeological methods can work together to support the stewardship of ancestral landscapes. Well, there we go. So this project combines ethnographic interviews, archival research, cemetery mapping, and geophysical survey methods. The goal of this survey is not excavation, but rather identifying possible burial gaps for future interments while protecting existing graves. This research is grounded in descendant-centered archaeology and emphasizes collaboration, memory, and community stewardship. The Harris Neck community emerged after emancipation as formerly enslaved African American families established farms, churches, schools, and fishing economies along the Georgia coast from the former Peru plantation. Gould Cemetery became one of the community's primary burial grounds and preserves evidence of multi-generational kinship continuity that extends back into the 19th century. So you can see, I don't know, there's a little blue dot down there on the end. That's exactly where the Gould Cemetery is located. And this little outline is where the Harris Neck community used to be in the 1920s. So you can kind of see the dashed lines of the farms and the little, you can see their roadways and their houses. So it was a fairly well-thriving community. But in 1942, the federal government condemned approximately 2,700 acres of Harris Neck to construct the Harris Neck Army Airfield during World War II. Residents were forcibly displaced from homes, churches, and agricultural lands. Many descendants argue that promises of return were never fulfilled. In fact, in 1962, the landscape was then later transferred into the Harris Neck National Wildlife Refuge, and currently exists as that today. And the Gould Cemetery resides in there as well still. So it further complicates the descendant access and the stewardship that we can do. But the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Group has been great in starting to establish relationships with the Harris Neck community. So the Gould Cemetery therefore becomes one of the only enduring physical spaces through which descendants maintain ties to their homeland after their displacement. So based off of initial inventory of the graves that are currently existing and remain at the Gould Cemetery, this demonstrates a long-term continuity of burial activity at the cemetery. A total of 212 graves were documented, with 189 marked graves and 23 unidentified burials. The earliest identified burials date to 1882, shortly after emancipation. The 1920s show the highest number of burials, while the 1940s corresponds with wartime displacement and community disruption. So you can see here, so the highest was in the 20s. So just based off of some initial interpretation with the community and what we have, you can show that the amount of graves shows long-term active community cemeteries. By the presence of the marked graves, there's strong preservation and family memory associated with this. And the unidentified graves kind of show and expose the degradation that has come over time with their unavailability to access their cemetery. 1882, post-emancipation community formation, and then the population growth and stabilization of their community really is highlighted by the high effort. And then you can see displacement area and mortality increase in the 40s during the wartime. The grave markers themselves reveal important information about social identity, economics, religion, and memorial traditions. Granite and marble monuments represent long-term investment and memorialization, while concrete slabs and temporary funeral home markers demonstrate more economical forms of burial commemoration. Veteran markers and religious statutory reflect military service, spirituality, and ancestor care. So there was a lot of different types of funerary markers found across the Gould Cemetery that are still present and existing today. Probably the most were found were the concrete slabs throughout. And so you're seeing kind of the disenfranchisement and the economic accessibility and durability of the community post-1940. But the earliest 20th century traditions in Marble showed a kind of prosperous, really viable community there in the early ones. So repeated surnames and tightly clustered plots demonstrate strong kinship-based spatial organization throughout the cemetery. There were markers documenting military service that connects the local community histories to broader national events like World War I, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. All members of the military service are present in the Gould Cemetery. Eastern star symbols and further Masonic imagery demonstrate participation in fraternal organizations and other community leadership structures. Oral histories recorded through the Georgia Writers Project in the 1940s describe traditional Gullah Geechee funerary practices, like all-night vigils, drumming, singing, and speaking directly to the deceased. Earlier traditions involved shells, bottles, and dishes, and evolved into newer forms of grave decoration that include cedar plantings, flowers, fences, and religious statuary. These traditions demonstrate cultural continuity through changing forms of material expression. Many graves today only survive as concrete slabs, weathered markers, or oral memory. Temporary funeral home plaques are especially vulnerable to decay over time, leaving burials unidentified. Several graves documented in earlier surveys are now unreadable or missing entirely. These preservation concerns demonstrate why surface evidence alone cannot reliably identify all burials within the cemetery landscape. Ground penetrating radar, or GPR, offers a non-invasive method for identifying possible grave shafts and burial anomalies beneath the ground surface. Descendant oral histories and knowledge of family plots help guide survey priorities and interpretation. The ultimate goal is to identify burial gaps suitable for future interments without disturbing existing graves. In conclusion, the Gould Cemetery functions as both an ancestral burial ground and a material archive of displacement, spirituality, kinship, and resilience. Despite federal dispossession and landscape transformation, descendants continue to maintain relationships with the cemetery through memorial practices and stewardship. This project demonstrates how descendant-centered archaeology can support ethical preservation and future cemetery care within African American communities. And that's it. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, all of you. I think all three of your projects kind of speak to work we're doing at the archives, from the GPR we did in Whitfield Square to we've got a request in right now for the Powder magazine for funding, and of course the work we're doing on our Proud Savannah project, and I'm so happy that you made use of our collections, so yay. Questions for our speakers or comments? Yes?
I have a question for our first speaker. I've seen the directory of First City in the last 8 years or so, and it included churches. I wondered if you could tell when that started to be listed.
So, First City Network actually had a connection with the Unitarian Universalist Church. I think that's the full title. Since its establishment, they did host some of their monthly meetings at the church, and then once they had gained their own place on Tatnall Street, as I mentioned, they just had like a partnership with them, and then like the directory that I mentioned in the year 2000 that had like 93 different businesses and organizations, they had, I'm nearly positive, like 3 or 4 different churches that they were at least associated with, or they outwardly expressed that they were lesbian and gay positive. So I know the first one for sure, but there are plenty more that they had connections with.
I think did you come across any comparisons between and I can't remember the gentleman's name, the guidebook that you were talking about to the Green Book, I think that would be really interesting.
Yes, there definitely are lots of comparisons. Reagan and Gonzaga, the people that had done the Mapping the Gay Guys project, had said that they were not only inspired to do the project because of the Little Green Book, but also that Dameron used influences of that book in his creation of them. So it's like full circle all the way around kind of deal. So I don't know if there is a digitized version of Green Book. Well, that's good to know. So maybe they also got inspiration from that project as well.
How did people get a copy? You said that they sent away for it? Would they ask for it to be like delivered to their? How did they get a copy of the book?
So it was sent to their houses, and it was in discreet packaging with no real big identifiers. And then the same goes for the network newsletters. Whenever they would get sent to people's houses each month.
You would sign up to get one like sent to you.
Yeah, yeah.
Have you mapped out these places in Savannah?
So that definitely is something that I would want to look into. The professors on my thesis committee really want me to look into incorporating a public history aspect of my thesis project. So that really depends on how busy everything is.
I'm going to put a plug in for our Story Roots mapping project and say you should put it in our mapping project.
Okay.
And I'll give you the information on that.
It's definitely on my radar for sure.
Yes, ma'am.
Marcus, I'm so interested in this project because there was something in the paper years ago about the magazine, and we went out prowling around on it. It was all overgrown and locked up. Did you get inside to take the pictures, or were those in the archive?
Yes, I had to wait to get in the photo magazine. There's actually a very wise lady that works at the city. Access to the photo
Pays
magazine.
to know people in high places.
Yes, and you know what? If you're really, really nice to her, and if you make the case, you may want to go in. Her name's Luciana. No, but it's the pictures that I got from. There's another lady named Ellie Isaacs did a great report, and I was able to actually meet with her, and she was able to. A lot of my pictures, actually, I had some of the same pictures, but hers were better. And so, as I was putting my pictures into my PowerPoint, I was like, Ellie's is better than mine. And so, but the goal one day is to have it to where it's a park where there's different ideas that have been thrown around there, but there's another keeper of the powder magazine there at all times to keep it safe. Because the problem they've had, even when they have the newspaper articles, when it just recently, I didn't get to this because I didn't have much time, it recently got nominated and approved as it's on the National Register of Historic Places, and the city put a historical overlay over it so nobody can develop land around it. And so now everything is set. We just need the funding, which Luciana's working on, to be able to develop it as a beautiful park where people can come and experience the history. And we're looking forward to that. There's something called the Powder Magazine Park Committee. Charming gentleman by the name of Tommy Holland. He's been working on it for years, since before, I think the early 90s he started working on it, and he's been really pushing to make sure. Before he got involved, I think developers were trying to knock it down and put a used car lot down. And so him and another gentleman who since passed, they've been really working hard lobbying the city to get it to where it is now. And of course, Luciana and the city, they've really helped to make sure that it's preserved. But the greatest way you can preserve something is by its continued use. So now we're looking for that next chapter to where we can actually use it for something productive. I want to see it fall apart.
I have a question for Meghan.
Oh, okay.
So you mentioned that the area surrounding the cemetery was turned into a preserve in the 60s, is that
Yes,
correct?
that is correct.
So when did they stop allowing people to bury people in the cemetery with that caveat in mind?
Well, that's interesting that you ask. They actually did not stop burying people in the cemetery throughout that turn. I'm sure that as things turned over, there were phases. It fell into neglect and disrepair. There was a lot of negligence tied, the neglect of both the Fish and Wildlife and of the community because of the lack of access. But it did fall into disrepair, and then there was periodic burials there still, even throughout up until very recently. They're still actively using it, so that's a big part of why we're going to do ground penetrating radar in the cemetery, so that you lose track of things, headstones go missing, things like that. But as far as I'm aware, and based off of my research, they never stopped. But yeah, so.
So Megan, how close is the cemetery to where the airfield was?
Well, it's so if you've ever been there, there's still the cement strip. So it's in the southern area. It's actually by a place called Gould's Landing. So it's by the fishing area, and there's a dock and a bay. So it does have a fence around it now. It's protected, and it's well maintained by the community and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife currently. So it was by. They didn't use it. It wasn't close, I guess, is an easy way to describe it.
Well, so during the years that McIntosh County and the sheriff in particular had control of the property and was engaged apparently in a lot of felonious activity out there.
We didn't have enough time for that.
But the cemetery was still available to former residents to continue to use even when he had control of it.
I mean, I don't think officially above board. I know there was a lot of problems, a lot of civil rights problems with the community in the Papal dynasty. So I haven't, some of my archival research, I haven't yet interviewed the community. I'm just kind of getting this research kicked off, so the background research, I look forward to finding out more about how their access was and what that relationship looked like back in that day. There's still graves present based off of the inventory during that period. So I'm not sure whether that was by shade of night or how they got in there to keep using it. So it's an interesting topic for sure. Yeah.
Well, you all.
Thank you.
All of these have been fabulous.
Any closing question or comment from anyone?
Was the Gould name, I know I live on St. Simon's, and Gould, I think, was a lighthouse keeper. It was a Gould. I didn't know, was that the family that owned Peru Plantation?
No, I don't, not that I'm aware of. I actually don't know the etiology of the name of it, so I'm sorry about that. It's a good question.
Well, I want to thank all three of you. Great presentations, and I appreciate you sharing your research and your work with us today. So, final.